Lord Alton, thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us today. It has been said that North Korea, which is a country you know much about, is the most difficult place to be a Christian in the world. In your assessment, how difficult is it to be a Christian in North Korea?
It was said of the ancient Christian martyrs by Tertullian that the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. And I think nowhere in the world is that more evident than in Korea today. There were 8,000 Catholic martyrs who died for their faith. St. Andrew Kim was only 23 years of age when he was executed. He was the first Korean to become a priest. And even in more contemporary times, 60 years ago this year, the ceasefire was agreed at the end of a war, the Korean War, which took the lives of 3 million people. And what is often forgotten, that amongst those who died at that time were many of the Christian missionaries who were working in Korea. So people like Mother Beatrix, who had been a nun there for 50 years serving the poor, she, along with Bishop Patrick Byrne, were taken by the North Koreans and they were executed on what was called the Long March. I record some of these stories in a book I published this year called Building Bridges, Not Walls. It's about whether or not there's hope for North Korea. And I tell the story of the coming of the church and the role that it's played even in more contemporary times. People like Kim Dae-jung, who was the leader of the opposition in South Korea against the military dictatorship, became a Nobel Peace Laureate. He was also someone who would rise to become president of South Korea, but he was a Catholic convert, and he and his friend Cardinal Stephen Kim stood against the military junta at the time. So they brought about fundamental political change in South Korea, and that vibrant democracy gives us an example of what North Korea can become like one day.
Lord Alton, you've visited the country several times. Is there any one incident you've seen, or perhaps one story you've heard, that illustrates for you what it's like to be a Christian in the country?
There, according to the United Nations, are around 200,000 people in the prison camps, the gulags in North Korea. One young man I met called Shin Don-hok, about whom a book has been written, it's called Escape from Camp 14. He tells the story of how he watched his mother and 2 brothers executed in that camp, and how he then escaped from the camp, and how he eventually got to South Korea, where he's an active member of his church. I also visited a place called Anju, which is north of Pyongyang, and I met people there who told me how Catholics in that town had for 60 years without a church, because their church had been razed to the ground during the Korean War, had been worshipping in the rubble, without priests, without pastors, without bishops, and they've kept the faith alive in North Korea for the whole of that time, in acute suffering. It's a place where people are persecuted for their religious and political beliefs, where anyone who falls out of favour with the regime suffers egregious violations of their human rights.
Lord Alton, thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us today. Thank you.
A pleasure.